Welcome, everyone. My name is Dora. I'm one of the organizers of Qesher, and you can also see here Sebastian, who is the other organizer of Qesher. Both of us are joining you from Budapest, from Hungary. And just for those of you who haven't been to Qesher events, I want to just very briefly introduce our project. Qesher means connection in Hebrew, and we started this project almost 6 years ago now, just in the beginning of the pandemic. And ever since, our aim has been to introduce different Jewish communities, history, culture, present day situations. So I know that many of you join our events regularly, so you know that most often we introduce virtual tours or talks about a specific city's or country's Jewish heritage. Our book club series is also very related to this topic, although we don't strictly just introduce books that speak about one city's heritage or one country's heritage, because it's all interconnected and they're very often family stories or in other ways connected to Jewish life around the world or to the Jewish diaspora, I could say, which actually happens to be even the title of today's book, which is called simply Diaspora. And I'm going to introduce Isaiah Margulies, who is a merchant seaman by day, and just as we found out yesterday, he's also a pilot and a writer by night. Much of his writing is technically and spiritually influenced by his time working at sea. The broader Jewish diaspora and his own small part of it guided the overarching narrative that became his debut novel, Diaspora. So, first of all, I want to welcome you, Isaiah, and then please just share a bit about this book and what inspired you to write it.
Of course. Well, as you all know, my name is Isaiah,
Oh,
and
sorry, you say it so much nicer.
oh
So,
no, it's
it's
fine.
Isaiah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, Isaiah, and yeah, I wrote this book a few years ago when I was about 23 years old, and it took me about 3 years. As Dora mentioned, I work offshore. I'm a seaman or a deckhand. I paint boats for a living, and most of the book was written in my time working offshore, a little bit of time at the end of the day or at home. And the book was basically just an exploration of my own small piece of the Jewish diaspora. I have a father who lives in India, and I have some family in Israel and some family in New York. So we're all really scattered around the place. And the idea behind the book was I was trying to sort of uncover for myself where this sense of separation from one another began. I thought that as a Jewish person, um, and you know, from a Jewish family, really the Jewish diaspora, this story that we're all a part of, is basically the story that I wanted to tell. So, in order to tell this little story, how I ended up on a boat in Alaska, and how my father ended up in a little island in India, and how we all ended up in these places, I realized I kind of needed to go further back than today. I needed to go back to my father, and then of course his father, who was an immigrant from Argentina. But that's not really the beginning of the story. There's a really vague kind of mystical or magical origin to this story, and it begins at the place where my father used to tell me our ancestors are from. This little village in the middle of nowhere and somewhere in Ukraine that we lived in since the beginning of time, or as far back as we could ever know. So I thought, how can I tell this story of myself and my family? I need to go back in time. And I more or less worked backwards until we ended up 8 generations in the past in a little village between a river and a forest that today can't even be known where they are. And I named that little village Tolavoste. And that's where the story begins and ends more or less in the present day. So that's a little background for myself in the book.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing. That was a brief story about it, but can you share a bit more about your family history?
Sure.
And I think one of the very unique parts of your novel is that it's full of these little stories that seem like legends, almost
Right,
like
right.
these kind of stories that get passed on down the
Mhm.
generations
Right,
and
right,
then they influence everybody in the line.
right.
So, if you can share a bit about these stories and the legends in your family and your own family
Mhm.
story.
Of course. So there's one thing that makes this family in the book. Um, I call them the Vostevskis, people from Tolovoste. There's one particular story at the beginning that makes them more or less notable, and that's that in this little village, this cold, barren village somewhere in Eastern Europe, God decides, for some reason that we don't know, that these people are going to grow a winery. Now, I told this story because there's a very, very vague story in my family's past that someone once had a vineyard. And from there, I sort of just expanded uh, basically over about three chapters. The very improbable rise and fall of this family's little winery. It has a magical origin because I can't actually know what the origin is, but more or less what happens is there's a father who is failing in basically every single way with his family. And he's trying to find a way to increase his crop yield, and a disease destroys his crops. And he's trying to find a way to rebuild his house, and he's borrowing money from the butcher and the baker and the rabbi and his wife, right? And for some reason, God decides that he's going to give this man another chance to do something great for his family. So there's a very magical story where he ends up sort of face to face with God. God is waiting for him to realize the errors that he's made so far in his life. And when this man does, and he's basically in the lowest point that he can go, God extends a hand, kind of metaphorically, but also kind of real. And he offers him this gift of these seeds and some fertilizer that's going to allow it to grow. So this is just a big expanse of this story based on a very, very vague little memory that I have growing up about, some interesting things from my family's past. And in fact, I could read you a very small portion of it just to explain what I mean. You know,
Yeah, I was just gonna suggest
Right.
that to bring us a little bit to
Right, right,
Tollebos, the place where there is 9 months of
right.
winter.
Right. Okay, so actually, I'm just going to very briefly tell you the beginning of the book to explain the origin for this family and where they are and what's happening. So, this is the village of Tolovoste. Are you all ready?
Mhm.
Okay. So, the village of Tolovoste rested comfortably and quietly between the banks of the clear Yezhina River to the east and the dark tree line of the Tolegile forest to the west. On the right day, one may have thought it paradise. However, in paradise, winters did not last 9 months of the year. In the spring, as the men would sow their previous harvest seeds, as their daughters and wives, their feet bare, would wade down the river's banks, collecting its chalky mud to patch their walls. As the boys, between the yeshiva and the setting sun, would repair their roofs from the forest's pine, God would hear the rabbi, quietly praying that their upcoming harvest might stave off their hunger until the next. Their walls, their clothes, and even their buckwheat blended into the dark and dusty earth. they would not have known of the color blue if not for the sky. Eternally the color of dust, one may have thought that Tolavosta breathed in, slept in, and drank in dust. But make no mistake, the people of Tolavosta kept their linen sheets clean, drank the Yezhina's clear water, and breathed in God's sweet, dry air. So that's Tolavosta. There's this idea that my dad used to instill in me, and that's that there's absolutely no shame in being poor. His family was poor, everyone I've ever known was poor, but you still keep your house clean. You still hold your head high. You maintain, the dignity of your life. So in Tolavoste, they were as poor as dirt. Everything they had was the color of dirt. Their house was built with dirt, but their sheets were clean. Their water was clear, and the world, right? The air that they breathe, given by God, was sweet and pure. So this is the origin of Tolavoste. Now, if you notice, that's the description I give of this place. And I continue talking about, the world, the sense, the smells, but I don't ever tell you exactly when this began. I don't say this is the year so and so and 50 miles west of here or there, because we don't know, and I don't know. It's this very vague place. If you like a surety, that will come as we come closer to the present. There's a line that I say in the book before I go too much further is that the stories right now, for better or for worse, could become myth. But we all know what happens in our history. It doesn't stay myth. It actually becomes deeply, very brutally real. So that's not lost in the story. But for now, this is all just a myth. So there's an entire story over here about the birth of this first child. Um, I could read you just a very brief bit just to work you forward. So, with the favor of God, just before Tolavosta's harvests, a rare riverboatman might have sailed past it without even seeing the village. Their tallest house, of course, the shul, fell behind the walls of their grain. But if the favor of God never abated, then the people of Tolavoste might have had no need for prayers. As quickly as the snow would melt from their fields and raise the Yezhina in the spring, piercing wind, thick snow, and blizzard clouds would return with a force 3 times over in the winter. And this is more or less where the story begins. One night, centuries ago, near the end of an unusually long winter, the soon-to-be lush trees of the Tolajale forest languished with a sick, pallid hue. A wide, barren tundra blanketed their crop fields and buckled their thinly planked roofs. A violent blizzard danced overhead, threatening to reduce their planks to shards, and the men of Tolavoste recited the Ma'ariv, the prayers of the evening, no differently than any other day. Their fathers closed their Siddurim, concluding their dialogues with God. They said prayers for their wives, resting their hands on their dry and brushed hair, prayers for their children, bowing down to press their lips to their forehead, and went to sleep in their cold straw beds, satisfied the storm would blow not a moment longer than God ordained it must. However, in one dimly lit house, the prayers continued feverishly into the night. Sweating, as her shivering husband wandered in an uneasy dream, the pregnant Hanna Vostevsky felt a deep, wrenching pang in her abdomen. She dug her nails into her husband's hand as an agonizing wave of pain swept through her thighs. Yitzhak rolled over, lifted his head from his thin pillow, and opened his eyes. "What's wrong, Hanale?" Yitzhak said softly, his breath condensing in the dark air between them. "Is the baby kicking?" "It's not a kick," she whispered. "What was that?" he asked. "It's not a kick," she screamed. "Oh God, the baby's coming." "Now?" Yitzhak shouted into the darkness. He reached for his wife, taking her face into his open palm. Tears traced down his fingers in the valleys of her hollow cheeks. Yes, yes, now. And now we get into the very arduous experience of this mother about to give birth in the worst possible time of the year and possibly the worst possible time of her life. I'm not going to tell you exactly what happens there. But as you can assume, we're following a family. The descendants survive. More or less the idea behind the beginning of the book and that kind of writing style is there's this beautiful place. I think it's beautiful, but it's always butting right up against a tragedy, right? It's more or less the continuous story of the book. There's a beautiful situation and I think beautiful people, and then we see the suffering that they endure. Should I go on?
I think we can discuss a few other topics because
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
really,
absolutely.
interesting. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
it was great to hear the beginning of the story, and I think that's definitely for me one of the things I really enjoyed reading in your book is this magical part, which is like almost maybe half of the book, or at least
Mhm.
like a good big chunk in the beginning
Right.
when we are in Tolevoste and I think what is very unique is this magical realism that you describe in the description of the book, because we have introduced many books that are kind of family stories or recite or remembering a family's history, and very often they go, research like where did they live, what happened
Right.
exactly in that place,
Right.
uh, and yours is kind of an imagination of where you
Mhm.
imagine they lived. So I just wanted to ask, like, why I really like both approaches. I think both are really, really valid to like properly research our families and write a memoir of like where do we come from, and also like kind of where do we think we come from.
Right.
So
Mhm.
yeah, just if you want to speak a bit or maybe share one more story and just in not even reading
Sure.
necessarily, just in your own words from this magical realism so people can understand what it means to you.
So, in order to answer that best, I'd like to read like two paragraphs. And I promise there's a reason why I want to read this. Did I just do something?
I don't know, we
Okay.
just had some balloons flying.
Yeah, that's
That's
weird.
maybe part of the magical realism.
Yeah. So, there's a very small here. Stand by one more second, please. So the question is, why did I want to write this sort of just imaginative story at the beginning, right? Um, but to answer that, I'm going to read this chapter from the end of the book. Now, this is actually based on a very specific place in a very specific time. You won't necessarily know just from this, page, but you know, uh, take my word for it. You know exactly where we are right now, exactly when this is happening. There's no magic in this section. And this is now near the end of the book. About 7 generations have passed. Pogroms, the Holocaust. This is very, very in a very different part of the book. One bead of sweat formed on his temple. He stood up to look at his wife and child, still in peaceful sleep, to try to calm himself. He combed through his bookshelves, past the likes of Tolstoy and Yitzhak Leibish Peretz, in the hope that a great thinker's wisdom could reason with him. He looked deeply into his Chagall, as if the red and green fiddler, swaying through blue and yellow orchids and daffodils, could settle the turbulence in his brain. Not for the first time since he moved in with Donna, the apartment's warm airs suffocated him. He pulled his leather jacket from the closet, silently closed their front door latch, and left for a walk. Down Greendale Road, cool wind spun in small eddies, crossing between the brownstones, chilling his ears beneath his cap. A cobblestone park on the corner sat still and quiet. Dead leaves rested by its gate. Uri sat down beneath an elm tree, shading a great expanse of the park's short brown grass. With the bench's cold steel against his faded jeans, he took a deep breath, letting the air invigorate his lungs, stretched his arms, resting his hands on the ridge of the backrest, and looked up at the bright, clear sky. He knew from his time in the war that a cigarette would calm him down. A bright, cold, and quiet day satisfied him in a similar way. He had frequently begun taking
Can't hear
walks.
anything.
Sorry. Oh, okay.
You can keep going.
Right. He had frequently begun taking walks, always at random hours, and never for the same amount of time. Donna, with her usual passivity, had no qualms with the habit. She even supported it, as he would tend to come home with greater vibrancy and color than when he left. But if the treatment of fresh air was a better one than cigarettes, his main problem still lay with his affliction. Uri was not happy. Nothing he had changed, gained, or accomplished had made him any happier. And as far as he could divine, he had no reason for his unhappiness. He dropped his head in his hands. With the clarity of the cold sky, Uri contemplated his reality. So I wanted to read that part to you because that's not more or less a work of imagination in the sense that I'm pulling from a person in my family that I know very well at a time and place that I know very well and writing a story about how I understand they felt at this time. Um, I couldn't do that for the people of Tolovoste. And maybe it's because I'm lazy, or maybe it's because I didn't want to, or maybe I didn't have enough time. But I didn't want to really try to, and I didn't think it would have been necessary to really try to paint the most exact possible picture of, what their names were and exactly what they did for a job and when they were born and when they died. The beginning of the book, that character that you first see, that husband and wife, there could have been 50 generations before them exactly the same way. Just a husband and wife in a cold straw bed in a house barely put together by sticks, trying to survive through a winter and hoping that, the wife can survive childbirth in order to give the child something to eat. I didn't feel like I needed more or less proof that those people existed. That's the story of where we came from, and I think sort of a broad stroke was enough to explain that time in the sense of how different it was than the time we are today. There was hope and there was belief in God and there was magic, there were spirits, and prayer was it wasn't just an idea, it was a part of people's life. But in this character I just read you, he wasn't praying, he wasn't talking to God. God wasn't even there. He was just there alone in a park with the wind, resting his hands in his head. So, I'm sorry, did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think none of the questions need an exact answer, just like your family history doesn't need exact
Right.
research. I think also that's true to our conversation. But being from Qesher, I cannot help but to discuss a little bit the places that you present
Sure.
in your book. So there is Poland in the beginning, and then
Right.
Argentina, and then Israel,
Yeah.
and then the US at the end.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to ask you, what is your connection to these places? Have you been there to any of
Yes.
them? Are they also part of the magical part, or are they like the proper pieces that
Um,
you put together, the web of the diaspora? So just a bit
right.
like, how do you think of them?
For sure. Well, Argentina, South America is very prevalent in the book. I talk a lot about God from the perspective of of indigenous people in South America, in the mountains of Argentina, the different names that they have for their gods and their spirits, but sort of analogous to to the people of Toloboste with, our god and our folklore. I incorporated that into the book because my family has history in Argentina. There is a bit of family folklore about the way that one relative of mine escaped the Holocaust as a stowaway on a ship to Argentina. So we follow that complete story and the way he survives and the people he meets and the backstories of other people in Argentina. I've been to Argentina many times as a kid, and I was influenced by some of these um, sort of indigenous tales of of the gods of like the Quechua, language, and um, I follow like a child as he grows up in that world, more or less because I got the privilege as a kid to actually be, very closely influenced by that culture. My father grew up in Argentina and my grandfather did. So a lot of the stories that he would tell me, and there's a really big part of the book, a huge conflict that takes place in the neighborhood of La Boca. That's more or less where my dad grew up, and the conflicts they had with the police and the fights and the anti-Semitism and also the people that supported them. I heard about these things as a kid, so of course they had to be in diaspora. Um, so yeah, I have a close connection with Argentina, and I of course Poland. That's where we're from. Basically, every place and story in the book is just an amalgamation of everything that I did or knew up until the age 23. If you notice the big maritime element in the book, there's a lot of maritime symbolism. A big part is following this child who escapes the Nazis and is a stowaway. I have a vague family story, like I said, but also I spent years of my life at sea. And I know the feeling of what it's like just to be a person on the ocean, and I wanted to add that to the book. So I guess the answer to the question, everything that I knew about my family history and all of the places that I went, I used in some little piece here and there to build the story.
And then after Argentina, the story arrives to Israel. I
Oh,
guess these
right,
are
of course.
not secrets,
Right,
or even if those of you who plan to read the book, I
right,
think it's something that you know from the beginning somehow that these places will
right,
appear.
right.
And I think it was a very interesting contrast between Argentina and Israel in your book, in the
Yeah,
sense of like the way you write about, like Argentina is still much more mystical to me, the way you write,
right,
than the stories in Israel, which are much more real. And just
right.
wanted to ask what's your experience with that, or
Well, do you mind if I read a page again?
go ahead.
Okay. I think I can explain that by reading the exact transition from when the story of Argentina ends and the story of Israel begins. So, if y'all don't mind, I'm just going to spend 2, 3 minutes. I'm picking up right now at the point where we followed this beautiful young boy with all kinds of promise. He was from Tolovoste. He was a fiddler. He would teach other kids for a couple kopecks, and he would buy his mother a candle for Shabbat so they could have a candle. It was a very simple, beautiful, sweet boy. And he escaped the Nazis. And he goes to Argentina, and he lives his entire life. And then we have the the situation of the desaparecidos in Argentina, for anyone who's a little bit, familiar, um, the story kind of repeats again. People are being targeted, people are being disappeared. The family, he notices this. He remembers what happened. So now we pick up at that moment when it's time to leave Argentina. At that moment, Meir realized he had not finished running. The next morning, in the height of Operation Condor, as Videla's troops marched down the street, he left his sorry Buenos Aires apartment for the last time. Through streets of broken glass, with his family's two meager suitcases in his hands, past crying mothers in frantic search for their missing children, Meir led his family to the Israeli embassy of Buenos Aires. Sorry. Beside them, he boarded a plane for the first and last time in his life. In Jerusalem, he tried to let his shadow rest in the holy city of a sacred land, though still just as lost as if having never left the SS La Pampa, still plowing through stormy seas. Years passed. On those clear, dark nights, as his wife Yael and their teenage children slept soundly in their beds, rest eluded Meir. He gazed down his porch across the hills of Jerusalem, seeing the glass windows of the sandy stone buildings shining like lanterns on ancient cavern walls. When Meir did sleep in his dreams, recurring images of that young girl he had scorned and forgotten the name of, mixed with the faces of his mother, his father, his sister, an old Huarpe cook, a kind Argentinian man, and countless more, flowed into a dark red river, swirling around his head, drowning him in waves of unending guilt. He would wake up more tired than when he closed his eyes. No, he preferred to not sleep at all. But though his mind could not rest while asleep, he could find no peace while awake. He understood why. Ever since he first stepped off that Boeing jet, that ghost within his belly had darted side to side like a young fish in a glass bowl. This lost ghost had followed him to La Boca, and with seemingly nowhere else to turn, clung to the warmth and comfort it found inside its host. But in Jerusalem, as Meir looked over those lantern-lit hills, this ghost rose up inside Meir, saying, Meir, I am trapped in here. You know you cannot be the only one from Tolovosta who survived. What this implied terrified him. If he met someone from Tolovosta, he would have to face all the horror that passed him by the day he boarded the SS La Pampa, and feel the unbearable shame and guilt of leaving his family behind to suffer and die. In those panicked moments, in defiance of his ghost, he rushed back inside to wallow in the dark, as if by depriving the ghost of the sights which had stirred it, it could be pacified. But his ghost refused to let him be. The more Meir cloistered it inside the darkness of his home, the more angrily it twisted and gnawed at his insides. He would shut his curtains, close his eyes, hold in his tears, and try to play the grade school violin he had bought for 20 shekels at the shul. But despite drawing his bow across his strings, his violin would not sing the faintest tone. Meir could not deny the untenable truth. He could not continue on with a ghost from Tolovosta within him, nor could he bear to let it out. So, why did I read you that? That is the beginning of the portion where we talk about Israel. I've been to Israel many times. I have family in Israel. I love Israel. And for what it's worth, I deeply believe in Israel and its purpose. The issue that I had with of the point getting to Israel is even though I don't go into detail about the Holocaust, this is right after the Holocaust. Why why would Meir be happy, right? Why would anyone in this moment really feel so fulfilled and warm? This right now, the beginning of Israel, is actually coincidentally the darkest time in the story. So as the book goes on, there's this sort of interesting balance between a lot of hope and faith and promise, but also an overarching darkness. So the reason why there's, to answer the question, the reason why there's this big shift in tone is because, in my opinion, as far as like the story of the Vostevskis, it's kind of the beginning of the end. And the rights and the quote unquote the safety of having their own land and all of that is more or less overshadowed by this destruction, which I don't believe we've ever recovered from. And if you want to know why the story is called Diaspora, I basically it's as if the story is it's as if we were scattered and destroyed beyond the ability to truly recover. I'm done.
Yeah, I actually was going to ask you also the title, but
Right.
I'll close up with one question from my part, and then I'll read questions from the audience. And so at this
Yes.
point, I encourage everyone to put your questions in the chat if you like, if you're curious about anything. So yeah, it's also connected to diaspora and also what you said. So I started to have this sensation actually now. I mean, I read your book and also when I was reading, I had this question and we briefly discussed about that yesterday. But now as we're speaking, it kind of came to me that really the diaspora is kind of on three levels. Like on the one hand, like it's you having all the characters from the book somehow be inside you, or I mean you can comment on that. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but just kind of I had this feeling that on the one hand kind of you hold it yourself, all of them, and
Mhm.
then the second level kind of the family and also the story of Eastern European Jews that had this journey, may them be from Poland or from the Pale of Settlement, and then ending up in some random place like Argentina or anywhere else, and then Israel, and then the US, like this kind of journey
Mhm.
of these people,
Mhm.
of this specific Jewish group. But then I also felt like the third level, like that this is the story of all the Jews, no matter where they're from. Like they could be from Iraq, or they could be from Morocco, or from South Africa, or from wherever, and this story is still theirs too. So I just wanted you to comment on these three levels, like what you feel about them.
Right. So okay, I'm sorry, just to clarify, as far as three levels, there's the personal diaspora, there's the broader diaspora, then you mean like the specific
Yeah, no. So, okay, my original question that I actually
yeah.
even sent to you is do
Yeah.
you feel like that this story is kind of the story of Polish Jews or Eastern
Oh,
European
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Jews,
of course.
or do you feel like it's just a Jewish story in general? And then I
Right,
just kind of added the third level that it's just you, that it's all
right, right,
inside you and it's
right,
all inside each individual, let's
right,
say.
right. Well, to be honest, maybe to go even a little step further, well, I didn't even really set out to write a Jewish story. It just sort of so happened that the only story I could write would be Jewish. Um, I think that it should relate to, or it should resonate with any kind of Jew. I think I cover most of the Jews in the book. I think there's a couple there's some Yemenites, there might be a Moroccan there. Um I think most Jews are represented at some point in the book. Uh but I'd like to think that you wouldn't even really need to be Jewish in order to sort of feel that sense of diaspora. I think that the level is basically anyone who feels separated. Anyone who feels a lack of connection is part of this diaspora. Anyone who is Jewish is part of this diaspora. Anyone who isn't in touch with their family is part of this diaspora. Anyone who isn't in touch with God is part of this diaspora. Um, I think it's kind of why I wanted to take the title. Um, and there's so many stories about the Jewish diaspora, but I really felt like this was a story just about the state of being in separation. And on one, two, or three levels, there's a deep separation that we all have, that most of us have. And yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, that was my intention. I think you might have just briefly mentioned about how really is my own story in this. Well, I'm not so great at writing about things I don't know. So I think most of us know ourselves, or at least try to know ourselves, the best. And more or less, as we go back in all these generations, there's a piece of my own feeling of the diaspora in all of these characters. So it's sort of, in some ways, a very, very broad way to just write a story about how I felt on a boat.
Thank you so much. And it's so interesting that you say that it's the lack of connection and you're on a Qesher presentation, meaning connection. And I just feel like that I think that was that's the reason why we chose the name Qesher for Qesher, because we want to create that connection. So whoever feels that there is no connection between all of us
Hmm.
scattered around in the diaspora, that
Hmm.
there actually is. It's just
Hmm.
sometimes we feel it's invisible, sometimes we
Right.
feel we sometimes we don't feel it, or we feel it that it's there, but we just don't have a practical way to grab onto it. And it was just a nice closing for our conversation. But now I will read questions that came in from the audience. Well, the first question is just, I guess, a curiosity. How did your dad wind up in India?
Uh, um, my dad wound up in India after I graduated high school. I'm one of three kids, or one of three siblings. They're all older than me, so I was the last. I was the last to leave the house. I lived with my dad. Um, he met a very nice woman in India, and more or less, he felt like I left to Louisiana to work on a tugboat. That's what I did when I was 18. Um, so he was basically near retirement age, and he felt like that was just the best next place for him. If I can speak on his behalf, I also think on Social Security, a Social Security check goes a lot farther in India than in New York. Um, but yeah, it's just sort of that practice, or that very practical reason of just going where's the best place for you at the time.
But I think there's also this underlying story, which also we see from your family, that
Right, right.
once people start moving around in the world and they don't necessarily feel very rooted in a specific place because that's not really where they're from, so they can just easily kind of keep on moving.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that's
Like
that's
you
kind of
do
the
too.
case.
Like you are
Right.
moving around.
Right. It's sort of it's kind of, as I was, thinking before, after, World War II, this is kind of the situation we're in. We just sort of keep moving. If you're, very well blessed to, live happily and comfortably in Israel, but the rest of us in Louisiana or India or wherever, we don't really have that strong of a connection. We kind of just move where is best for us. So yeah.
The next question is whether you are sad in today's world that magic and connection to a deity is missing.
Um, I believe God is sad. Um, and this is actually probably my favorite chapter in the book. I won't spoil it, but um, God basically he cries, right? But what God notices is that, you know, um, in the past, when he would cry, it would rain, right? And when he was happy, the sun would shine. But he realizes it rains when the weatherman says it will, and you know the sun shines without him, and there's really no place for him anymore in this modern world. And it deeply troubles him. But then there's a line in the book towards the end of this chapter, and it goes more or less that if someone were to talk to God in this situation, God is too lost in contemplation with this great contradiction, right? The creator who is unknown by the people he created. So if someone were to talk to him, they would get a very horrifying answer. Because if they were to learn that even God right now feels separated and even God can't answer these questions anymore, what kind of chance do we have to feel connection and to answer our own questions, right? So I guess that's kind of just a poetic way to say that, yeah, I feel like this world is kind of missing that magic. It's kind of, when we talk about the magical realism in the book, it's sort of a story about the destruction of the magic. There's no magic near the end. It's all at the beginning. This sadness that, some of these characters feel has that underlying lack of magic and lack of connection. So, if you decide to read the book, you'll sort of see uh, this talk about God and this talk about magic as being kind of like the bedrock for all the great things that happen in these people's lives. And the times when it's not there, it's sort of a very depressing situation to be in. Um, I'm not religious at all, honestly, but I do believe that this faith in magic and God is very important for sort of a happy life, if that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it does, and thank you so much. There is a comment about the native culture. Theo
Yeah,
is saying that he recently visited Canada and met with Mi'kmaq friends. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. And he says that surviving mentality can be paralleled between Jewish and native cultures overcoming
yeah,
oppression.
right. No, absolutely. And uh, there's this big story in the book about this child who's basically he's just like how Tolavosta is between a forest and a river that we don't know. This child is from a very similar situation in the Andes Mountains. I describe it as a river to nowhere and a mountain blessed by God. And he has his village basically destroyed by disease from missionaries, and he wanders through the mountains. And a lot of sort of the same, if you read the book and you notice at the beginning these questions that people have, and the way God answers them, it's the same thing in the mountains of Argentina, very, very far away. It's the same thing with this little boy. He calls God something completely different, right? But there's that parallel. That parallel is important for the story because this child who escapes and grows up ends up meeting one of the escapees from Tolavoste, and there's that kindred connection. So it's kind of why I said before, I don't necessarily think it's a Jewish book. I just happen to be Jewish, and that's the perspective I write from. Um, yeah.
Thank you. Diane is suggesting that you should read Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heskel. If Diane, you want to comment on that, why you thought of him, then you're welcome to even unmute and share with us. And then Irene spotted a Martin Buber book, I think, behind you. Could that be?
Yes. Um,
And
this
if that's an
actually,
influence on you, and
so
if so, then how?
um, I'm somewhat ashamed to say that I don't know as much about Martin Buber as I should. I think I read I and Thou, or I think in German it's Ich und Du, right? Many years ago with my dad, because my father is a scholar on Martin Buber. So actually, he wrote this book over here, Will and Grace, Meditations on the Dialogical Philosophy of Martin Buber. I don't Paul Mendes Floor, I believe he passed away recently. He was a big scholar of Martin Buber. So my dad sent me this because he wrote a chapter in it. Um, I wish I could comment more on him, but my father's, philosophy comes a lot from him. So um, I I encourage you to read his writing as well.
Great, thank you. I think I read most of the questions. There are two questions that were discussed in the beginning. Maybe they were
Yeah.
not here, so just to repeat, if the name of the town in your book is invented or real.
So there was a village, or maybe there is a village called it's either pronounced Tluste or Tvoste. Um, that is the it's the name of the village that my grandfather was from, that he escaped from, that was destroyed in the Nazis, or sorry, destroyed by the Nazis. There's in the book, uh the descendants of these people do try to go back to the village, and they find that it's not the whole story, I won't ruin it for you, but they find that it's not exactly as they might have hoped, right? My father went to visit Toulouse many years ago when I was a kid, and he went to the library and he tried to do some research about the place. And the people there told him, "You're in the wrong town because Jews have never been here before," which of course wasn't true, right? This is our history, but the history was erased. So that's kind of I thought that was a really interesting story. So I decided to name this village and more or less tell the story of Ploeste. But just because I didn't want to be sort of, pinned down to the specific history of Tluste, it's inspired by Tluste and it's named Tolovoste. Yeah.
Thank you. And another question that we also discussed somewhat, but maybe you want to add anything.
Hmm.
Um, you describe how diaspora isn't geographically in one place, and if
Hmm.
you could describe different localities, locales encountered in the diaspora.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, in the diaspora, of course, we start in Tolovoste. We end up as stowaways on a train car and in the port of Gdansk on a ship heading all around the world and eventually ending up in Argentina. There's a big section in the port of La Boca and Buenos Aires in the in the late 19th and early 20th century. This took us, like I said before, to the mountains of Peru. Um, uh, North and south of Israel, through the wars of Israel, and into the United States, obviously into New York. And then there's a big section. Perhaps you might be able to guess which character is based mostly on me. There's a big section that takes place in the South, in the US South, in Louisiana and Mississippi. Um, so yeah, there's a wide range of geography. I have three continents, many countries, a dozen different cities. Yeah.
Thanks so much. And we got an answer from Diane. One of Haskell's strong themes is that there's a partnership between God and man. He is such an important figure in modern history, a great philosopher and scholar. He was a great friend of Martin Luther King.
Oh, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think my dad used to talk about him. I need to brush up on my great writers and philosophers.
great. I because I asked Diane what made her think of him. So I
Right.
understand this partnership between God and man, and that you also mentioned or touched upon in your description of your book. So I think I read all the questions. So we will close for today. So I'll just ask you if you wanna add any last words, anything that you feel like has not been mentioned but you'd like to share about the book.
Um, You know, I don't personally, I don't think I'm the best, um, what do you call it? The best advertiser. I think that talking about writing is a little bit like talking about singing or talking about dancing or talking about cooking. Um, a chef might like describe to you the ingredients of a meal and why they cooked it and where it's from, but you don't really enjoy food by hearing the chef talk about it. You enjoy it by eating it, right? You don't enjoy a song by hearing a singer talk so much about the inspiration. You need to hear the song. So I do think that fundamentally, the the only way to really understand a piece of writing is to read it, for any writer, read it and read it slowly and take time with it and think about it and sit with it. In our world today, this is difficult. We have busy lives and we have a lot of stimulation, and everyone and their mother, sister, and goldfish can write a book. So it's very hard to pick out a good one. I think I wrote a book which is rewarding to read, and I would be very honored if you decided to give it a chance, and I think you would enjoy what you would find. If anyone likes the book, I'm pretty easy to reach, and I always love feedback and reviews, and anything else is always, as a writer, very well appreciated.
Thank you so much. So we'll share your email address with the participants in tomorrow's follow-up email, and we'll also share, of course, the recording of this talk or this conversation, and also where you can buy the book. There was a question about it. We'll share also a link, but already it's in the chat. So those of you who already want to go and buy it, it's already there, but you will also receive it in your email tomorrow. So thanks so much everyone for being curious and taking the time to spend this hour with us, even a day before Pesach starts. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Isaiah. I hope I'm finally pronouncing your name right. For sharing your book with us. I think I really enjoyed reading it, and I think it really does resonate with a lot of different Jewish and human experience, as you said. So thank you for writing it, and thank you for letting us know about it. And we wish everyone Chag Sameach. And actually, our next event will be during Pesach on Sunday about Argentina. So those of you who are curious about some of these topics that were mentioned related to Argentina, we will have a full talk, a full lecture discussing in detail what happened and how Jews got there and how is Jewish life in Argentina today. So thank you. We hope you can join us. Thank you, Isaiah, and thank you everyone for being here.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks for all your beautiful comments I'm reading right now. I appreciate it.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.